Hey everyone, it's Lindsay from End Ohio's Parent Penalty, and today I have a reaction to last night's webinar from the Ohio Association of County Boards, in which they tried to explain the training session they did where they called parents greedy, mental, lazy, ick, entitled, and several other names. So let's get into it. So one thing that I found really fascinating about this was some of the things that they are taking for granted or things that they're taking as a given. So the first one is this idea that SSAs inherently hate, dislike, biased against, whatever word you want to use, against the people that they serve. If you've worked in any kind of service industry, anything where you're serving people, so even as a teacher or a doctor or nurse, we don't really usually take for granted that you despise the people that you are tasked with serving. So we don't usually think of teachers as hating their students. Doctors hate their patients. Nurses hate their patients. Bus drivers hate their passengers. We don't really usually think of that. So it's really interesting that they kind of took that as a given here. And here's a few examples.
In that session, family members, people with disabilities who also work at county boards spoke with service and support administrators, SSAs, about the ways that the personal biases they bring to interactions with families can and does negatively impact these relationships.
So that's Adam Herman, the head of the OACB, talking, and then he goes on to talk about the words that were used: greedy, mental, lazy, all those words.
These words were very negatively biased towards families. In fact, they were objectively offensive words to say about any person or family, which was the point of the exercise.
So it wasn't covered why people who have all these terrible, harsh, miserable feelings like greedy and ick and mental are working in this field. It's just assumed that they're going to be working in this field. This is all they can get. This is all they can hire. I don't know what the reason is, but that's who's working in this field. And we need to disabuse them of these feelings in some way.
As well as the ongoing conversation about what must be done before words like those are no longer said by professionals in the DD system.
So if we look to other industries, we can see how to get professionals in your industry to stop saying nasty, obnoxious things about their clients and the customers and the people that they serve. And the way to do that is that you fire them and you remove them from the system. In any other company, whether it's education or healthcare or Fortune 500 company, if you're caught saying stuff like this, you are out. You don't get retrained on how to stop thinking that people are ick and mental and greedy and lazy and entitled. They just get rid of you, which is what should be happening here. Another question is that if the SSAs are assumed to hold all this bias and hard feelings and negativity against the people that they are tasked with serving, where's that coming from? Did they come in with that? Or is it possibly coming from the top down? And that's one of the questions I asked that they chose not to answer. I wanted to see if they saw the connection between the stereotypes and the bias that the OACB used in its 2023 lobbying effort against parents of minors, calling us dangerous, saying that we would keep our kids isolated at home so we could get more money. Do they see any connection between, saying that you're going to keep a child isolated at home in a bad way to earn more money with people today calling us greedy? Isn't that really the same thing? Is the Ohio Association of County Boards the organization that's causing the bias in the first place? So we haven't gotten an answer to that, but hopefully they will address that in their follow-up. Another thing a lot of families kind of contact me about after the webinar yesterday was the idea that when they did this webinar, they showed a word cloud on the screen, but it wasn't the one from the actual video. It wasn't the one from the actual conference. So luckily, my question about that didn't get through, but someone else's did get through. So they did go ahead and address that.
Starting out, these words that you showed, these words that you showed from the More Than a Job group aren't as bad as what I saw from that day. I was offended by what I saw in the video when greedy, lazy, entitled were used to describe families like mine. I feel like I have to fight for everything that we get. Do you agree with those words?
The person who asked that question is correct. What they showed during the follow-up webinar was from a previous time that they had done this same exercise. It wasn't the one in question from the video. So It has stubborn, controlling, angry, demanding. I mean, those are not nice things to call people, but it doesn't have slurs on there like mental and lazy and greedy, which is a whole other level. And that's what came out in this 200-person SSA meeting. One observation I kind of take away from that is it sounds like the previous time that they did this, they were getting maybe more what they were looking for, things like stubborn, where you could say, you know, oh, this person seems really stubborn, it's bothering me, but wait, there's another side to it. And maybe they're just really tenacious and they're very passionate about, you know, advocating for their person. But there is no other side to greedy. There's no other side to entitled, lazy, mental. These are just awful. And these were never addressed. They just let it go. They let it fly in this meeting.
I've seen some of the online clips and I was terribly offended. I mean, as a parent, and mortified, to be quite honest, as a professional. So I'm just going to say that.
That was Lisa Combs, the person in the bottom left that you just heard talking, saying how incredibly offended she was when she re-listened to the session and heard, you know, these words like greedy, lazy, entitled. But let's just give a quick listen into the actual session one more time.
A lot of people that put some triggering words for some of the family members on here, which is awesome because we're like, they won't say the mean things. We're like, oh, yes, we will.
And we got a couple more. Greedy, interesting. That's a good one. Greedy and entitled. That's a
Disrespectful.
Those were just a couple examples of these exact presenters egging people on, saying, awesome, we're going to say the mean things, greedy and entitled, that's a good one. There's a part where someone yells out, yes, which is not what is ever done in any kind of training like this. The facilitator is not supposed to be egging on the crowd and riling up the crowd. And, you know, we don't have it on this one, but we have the recording where they did the demonic voices for the parents. That is not normal at all for this kind of training. So to come back later and say, oh my goodness, I was just so offended. I don't know. You can be the judge of whether that was disingenuous or not.
Mental. I didn't say that.
Somebody just wrote it. By the way, for the next one, you're going to have a couple more. Emojis are welcome.
Our next question, why were people laughing when the word mental was used? That isn't funny.
I personally, when I'm stressed, when I'm happy, I laugh, and when I'm stressed and anxious, I laugh. And I don't remember laughing at it. There's nothing funny about that word. There's nothing funny about any of the words. I think my gut is that people were uncomfortable because they were identifying it and they didn't know what to do. And it just was like, and it wasn't about, we weren't laughing at people calling people mental. We were laughing at ourselves for being completely ridiculous.
So you're going to have to be the judge of whether the laughter that you heard was sort of a nervous titter because someone said something offensive and everyone was a little bit freaked out and didn't know what to do, or if it was a group of people just letting loose and dumping on the families that they serve and having a grand old time and encouraging each other to put in emojis next time.
Mental. I didn't say that.
Somebody just wrote it. By the way, for the next one, you're going to have a couple more. Emojis are welcome.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, I mean, I think a lot of it is, I think my kids would call it, it's cringy, right? It's just, and so we're reacting in a way in that moment.
Do you buy it? I don't know. What if we had a sample of this same audience actually laughing at something that was cringy, laughing in a sort of nervous, freaked out sort of way? It turns out that we do, and here it is.
I have a lot of bias around adoption, which actually I think this group heard me accidentally Tourette's the other day. So it was just a knee-jerk reaction.
That was an example of someone saying something cringy, people feeling a little offended, a little confused as to why they would say it. and then sort of going, like we've all done before. And you can decide if you think that nervous laughter that you just heard was the same as the laughter you heard when they said mental.
Mental. I didn't say it.
Somebody just wrote it.
Whether or not the laughter was real or just nervous laughter ultimately is not really the point. Above you see here an email from one SSA to another county board employee complaining about a parent of a person with disability and calling them crazy. So whether this laughter was real or not doesn't really matter in the end. People are calling parents mental, crazy, other sorts of derogatory terms in their internal emails, in their conversations around the office. That's happening in Ohio. And the question becomes, when this SSA is caught using this terminology, do you send them to anti-bias training put on by some untrained people? Or do you fire them, just like they would be fired in any other job on the earth? Moving on, another highlight I want to mention is when they are asked what they would do differently if they had this to do over again, they kind of brought in their incompetence as presenters into play.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. Marie, Stacy, and I all have complete other jobs than presenting. So we are not professional presenters. I have fallen into it in some topics, but I'm not a professional presenter.
This might lead you to ask, why were people who are not qualified presenting anti-bias training? And the reason is, the reason that they gave is because they are all family members of people with developmental disabilities. And I think this is where some of the clashing that we're having is coming from. So there's another given that we need to discuss. And someone, it wasn't me, submitted a wonderful comment here.
A statement and a question. Your family experience cannot compare to what most families face. You work for a county board. We don't, and that makes a difference.
Whoever posted that question, I so thank you. That was a wonderful question or comment to make, because it questions this given. And the given that they had understood was that they, because they have a family member with a disability who receives services, they can speak for those of us, or all of us, who have a family member who receives services. But their life is completely different. Their experience of this system is completely different than ours. And in some cases, these folks are aligning themselves with the Ohio Association of County Boards, which is known to lobby against people with disabilities. This was the only group to lobby against paid parents of minors. This was the only group to lobby against the behavioral add-on exemption for Ohio shared living. These people are passing donations on to whoever they want, who's going to support what the county boards want. They are not an advocacy group for disabled people. They are a lobbyist group for the county boards. And sometimes their interests might overlap with ours, for example, advocating for that pay raise. But oftentimes they do not. And so if you're a family member of a person with disabilities and you are very strongly aligned with this anti-disability lobbyist group, you've lost your cred with us. You have no credibility with us. And it's unlikely that we're going to be comfortable with you representing us to your colleagues. And we're going to see that come into play as we get toward the very end of the session, where they actually did get around to giving an apology.
Will you apologize to families for the way this presentation was handled?
I'll start that. At no point during this presentation did we anticipate that this would cause any hurt or any concern on anyone's part. So certainly that was not our intention at all. And if that happened, I'm very willing to apologize for that.
That was one of those, I'm sorry if you were offended types of apologies. But actually, we do see an interesting answer from Lisa Combs.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. This is probably the number one thing that has been on my mind for the last whatever. And I want to say that in my preparing and in my session, I felt like I was talking to colleagues from the perspective of family members. That was from a family member, my perspective. But, I think the bottom line is I still was in a professional position, and it was on me really think about the outcomes and who all I was really in the audience.
Here, I think we see a person who is a parent of someone with a disability and then who inexplicably has decided to work for this organization that lobbies against parents of people with disabilities, realizing that she can't, she has lost the ability to represent us in any kind of setting like this. So that is kind of a good step forward, I think. I hope she'll, rethink where she's working and who she's working for and why. But that was the closest thing I heard to a true apology. So to sum up, we got a little bit of an apology. We got some recognition that the words were offensive and that the training was handled poorly. We didn't get to ask our questions because they just cherry-picked a few questions that people had submitted, and they ignored most of the other questions. But they did say they would come out with a Q&A document, so hopefully we'll get answers to the rest of our questions when that comes out. If you're interested, please consider signing and sharing our petition, because we really do need to bring much more attention to this issue, especially if they're saying all of these SSAs are just brimful of bias against us. We need to get some better folks into these jobs because there's just no room for that in this industry.